Okay, so yesterday we had spoken about not taking bribes. Posuk Yud Tes. So it says, "Velosikach shochad." Third line from top of the page. Velosikach shochad ki hashochad ye'aver, page 1024. Page 1024. Ki hashochad ye'aver einei chacham yiflav divrei tzaddik. The shochad blinds the wise, and it distorts the words of the righteous. Now, first of all, we had mentioned yesterday the word shochad is closely linked to the Hebrew word echad, right? Which means that you become one. You lose your impartiality, which is always a trick in life. And number two, one of the commentaries says that the word chad in the Hebrew, the word chad means sharp. Sharp. So it's very interesting because the word sharp is always signifies somebody cutting through. And in Hebrew, when you want to talk about making a decision, it's a lachtochet adin. You cut through and you decide. The word cutting represents making a decision, getting to the point, getting through it, finishing it. So there's a concern. A guy who takes a bribe. Shochad is related to the Hebrew word sharp, because he's going to make, once he takes the bribe, he's going to make a decision based on his bias, based on the way he's been bribed. That's number one. Number two, I'll show you something very interesting. Just look in the pasuk. Look at the pasuk, and you have to see this inside. Do you see where it says "Velo sikach shochad"? Now look at those three words. Velo sikach shochad. Third line on the page on 1024. Towards the end of the line. If you see it, if you find it, show the person next to you. Velo sikach shochad. On those three words, look at the last letter in each one of those words. The last letter in velo is aleph. The last letter in tikach is a ches. And the last letter in shochad is a daled, which all spell out echad, which is exactly what we said. Velo sikach shochad is because you become one with the person who's giving you the bribe. So that's where the Torah alludes to it. Okay, now, in yesterday we were on the pasuk of tzedek tirdof, the next pasuk chof. Tzedek tirdof, and we had spoken about why is it, and then it says laman tichya v'irash so you should live and inherit the land. That means that justice obviously is a tremendous merit for the Jewish people, and distortion of justice is actually something that causes all sorts of calamities. In the Torah, is very interesting. You are used to the idea of rabbinic fences. Everybody's heard of rabbinic fences. What's the underlying idea of a rabbinic fence? Rabbinic fences? Yeah. For instance, muktzah and Shabbos and meat and milk separations and all sorts of rabbinic fences. The prohibition of yichud. You're not allowed to be alone with a non-male type person who's not your wife or mother or relative, which is a rabbinic fence. What is the one word? There's one word in English that describes the underlying theme of all rabbinic fences, which is what? One word in English. One word in English. Caution is close. Caution is very close. Precaution. What's that? Precaution is also close, right? There's even one word that I think of, and you're right, that may be a better word. That may even actually be a better word. I'm thinking of the word distance. It distances you from the sin. That's the whole point of it. A fence is something to distance you from the edge, right? If you're not at the edge, some of my kids and I were talking on Shabbos about people who are afraid of heights. So one of my kids said she's afraid of heights because she just, there's this feeling that when you go up high, you might just be tempted to jump, right? Which, they're saying people are strange, especially Kaplan children. So I can't argue. But my fear of heights is not that I may jump; it's that I may sneeze. And if I sneeze, then fall forward. A person sneezes, you're on your edge. Maybe there's a gust of wind is going to come. You're standing right on the edge. A lot of things can happen. Your friend, the practical joker, may think it's really funny to give you a push. A lot of things can happen. So what a fence does is it keeps you away from the edge. When the farther you are from the edge, that gives you a certain amount of margin of error. So if you're not standing right on the edge and you sneeze and pitch forward, so at least you didn't fall. That's what rabbinic fences are. There's only one time in the written Torah, where we find that the Torah itself commands us something which actually could be understood as a fence of sort. There's only one time the Torah tells us to distance ourselves. Actually, that's the second time. There's one time where the Torah says don't go near, and there's another time where the Torah says make sure you're far away. Anybody know where it is? Midvar sheker tirchak. you must stay far away from falsehood. Isn't that interesting? It never says you must stay far away from shatnez, and it doesn't say you must stay far away from pork, and it doesn't say you may start. It doesn't even say stay far away from idol worship. It does say it once when it comes to immorality. It says don't draw near. So the only time the Torah ever says anything about distancing yourself is when it comes to falsehood. Midvar sheker tirchot. So the commentaries point out that it's very interesting. There's no coincidence. When we talk about justice, what is that really a form of? What would you say for justice is a form of? Even Superman knows that, right? Truth, justice in the American way, right? So the truth and justice always somehow go together, which is true. You have to be truth and justice go together. When the Torah says tzedek tirdof, what does it sound like? What does it sound like? If you stop, think about the subtlety of it. You must remember, yesterday we said that the word tzedek repeated twice is an emphasis, right? So understanding, how does the article translate tzedek? Righteousness. I like justice better. I like justice better than righteousness in the context of the Torah, because we're talking about justice. We're talking about it in court. So we're talking about the pursuit of justice. Well, what does it tell you if it says pursue it, pursue it? What does it really sound like? A very subtle, gentleman, but you'll see that the connection is a very, very tight connection. If I say to you, pursue him, what does that sound like? You're running after it, but you may never catch it. Tzedek tirdof, chase after it. But the Torah doesn't say, tzedek, chase after it until you catch it. The Torah says, chase after it. If I keep telling you, chase it, that's my command. My command is chase him. I never said you're going to catch him. I just said chase him. Right? Obviously, when we chase something, we're trying to catch him. So there's no coincidence that when it comes to falsehood, the Torah says stay far away from it. And when it comes to justice, it says chase after it. What is the world that we live in called? Anybody know what the Kabbalistic term for our world is? Everybody heard the concept of Alma de Shikra. It's a world of falsehood. Everything in the world is false. It's all fake. It's all a bluff. It's all imagery. Even atoms, particles, that sort of thing. Isn't there mostly airspace in the atom? Right? So there's airspace in the smaller part of the atom. Every time they claim that they found the smallest particle of matter, but that smallest particle of matter is also made up of airspace around the nucleus. Isn't that true? And so just about everything, my uncle the physicist once said, who was also an atheist, so he once said that that we're talking about the atoms and particles and molecules, that sort of thing. He said, well, a chair, since atoms move around in they happen to move around in a certain order, but they could just easily go in disorder. There's nothing keeping them in order, and the chair could just easily hurl itself out the window. Yet I, who was an unsophisticated teenager, he wouldn't take my bet. Let's bet on the chair right now. Is the chair going to hurl itself out the window? That he wouldn't take my bet. On the other hand, you see when you break it down, the table is essentially there's airspace, so it's not really there. Right? It is. If you smack your hand on it, then you'll find it is really there. It's like the guy who says, do I really exist or am I a figment of somebody? The great philosophical question. You ever hear that question? Do I really exist or am I the figment of somebody's imagination? So I've always had the acid test to show somebody that he exists, which is to reach for his wallet. Right? And as soon as you reach for his wallet, or alternatively kick him in the shin very hard, then he'll see that he definitely exists. He is not a figment of someone's imagination. That's how we settle the philosophical arguments. But at the end of the day, it's called an alma. I was a great philosopher. It's called an alma de shikra. It's called a world of falsehood. You can never get to the truth. There's always more growth in truth. You can become more true and more true and more true and more true. Do you know that Rabbi Yaakov Kamenetsky was once, you ever heard Rabbi Yaakov? He was Rosh Yeshiva in America, the great one of the Gedolei Ador. He was once asked to write a letter of recommendation on the yeshiva's stationery. And he took a look at the stationery, or somebody asked him for a letter of recommendation to go to another yeshiva. They always write letters of recommendation. He took a look at the stationery, and he was very hesitant. He said, I'm not sure I could write on the stationery. Why not? Because the stationery at the top had an emblem of the yeshiva, and there were trees that the artist had put into the emblem, like trees surrounding the yeshiva. But the yeshiva itself didn't really have trees in front of it. The yeshiva itself didn't have trees. I guess the kids in Israel got it before Lag BaOmer. The yeshiva did not have trees in front of it. The emblem of the yeshiva is false. In other words, you're always wondering, oh my goodness, how honest can a person be? There's always more. There's always more truth to pursue. Rabbi Yaakov Kamenetsky was once walking into a silver shop. This is a man who was completely detached from anything materialistic in this world. So he walked into a silver, what's it called? A silversmith. And so somebody, they sell like one of these tourist shops. So he came out and somebody said, why did you go in there? He said, well, I was given a new silver Kiddush cup as a gift. And I wanted to go in and make an assessment to find out how much it's worth so I could report it on my IRS form. Can you imagine such a thing? I'm going to trouble myself to go find out how much my silver Kiddush cup is in order to report it to the Internal Revenue Service because I have to pay taxes on it. It's some sort of, whatever type of earning category that falls under. So if a person understands that there's no end, there's no limit. I told you, Rabbi Kamenetsky was the one who put on Rabbeinu Tam tefillin. Remember we spoke about Rabbeinu Tam tefillin? He started putting them on when he was 90 years old. Some people have the custom after you davening, after you put on the regular Rashi tefillin, which is the halacha, so then they put on the Rabbeinu Tam tefillin as well. So Rabbi Yaakov Kamenetsky, on his 90th birthday, he put on Rabbeinu Tam tefillin. So somebody said, wow, what is that, a special 90th birthday celebration? You made it to 90, so you're putting on Rabbeinu Tam. Is that a new commitment? He said, no, not at all. He said, when I was 45, I was once walking out of shul, and a guy said to me, you ought to put on Rabbeinu Tam tefillin. And I said to the guy, kind of half in jest, I said, when I'm 90. Well, today I'm 90, and I said, when I'm 90, I'll put on Rabbeinu Tam tefillin, so I have to put on Rabbeinu Tam tefillin. So, the concept of pursuing truth, and the person thinks, oh, come on, does that really matter? The answer is, yeah, it does matter. It does matter, because if you're going to be truthful, when it comes to even a little matter like that, you're careful not to say something, and even whatever you say, you maintain it. So at the end of the day, you're also, when it comes to real lies, and when it comes to lying to people and falsehood, then you're going to just say, it's not part of your personality. You can't lie. I simply cannot lie. That's what the Torah wants. And therefore the Torah says, in these two areas, truth and falsehood, you could never get there, totally, because it's a world of falsehood. And our job is, in order to constantly work on becoming a person of truth, and then look at the end of the pasuk, that you will live and inherit the land. Commentators say, a reference to the world to come. If you become a person of truth, and you pursue truth, and the Torah itself is truth, Chosamo, the Gemara says, Hashem's signature is emes. Hashem's signature is emes. So, by the way, do we have a we don't have a blackboard here. Can you picture the letter Aleph? Picture letter Aleph, the way the letter Aleph stands, and there's a letter Mem. You ever see the Mem? He has a wide bottom, and there's a Tuf, which is drawn like this. A Tuf has a line, and it goes up. Like got two legs. One of them is a wide leg. So the word sheker, which is falsehood, is a shin, and a shin has a little point to it. You're used to a shin with a flat bottom, and in a Sefer Torah, you'll see that a shin has a very sharp point. It's like three prongs like this, with a sharp point. A kuf has a sharp point, and another line with a sharp point, and a resh stands on a very sharp point. The letters of emes, the Gemara say, all have a firm foundation. An aleph has two legs that support it. A mem has a wide bottom, and a tuf has two legs, one of them. Whereas a shin, which is standing on a point, and a kuf, which are independent lines. It's not two solid legs that are joined together. Each one is on a point, and a resh is on a point. Because are you following me? The letter sheker, falsehood will not stand. Falsehood doesn't stand. Eventually, they're going to see through the falsehood. Emes is firm. Emes is the foundation. Emes is the world. That's what's alluded to in the pasuk. By the way, in marriage, never ever lie to your wife. Never ever lie to your wife. She will always find out. She will always find out, and then you're going to be in much bigger trouble for lying than whatever it was that you did. Whatever crime you committed, whatever you did wrong, it's all forgivable. By women, don't ask me why, it just is. By women, it's forgivable. Everything is forgivable. But if you lie to her or you try to deceive her, then you're in trouble. Then you've had it. When I made that mistake when I first got married, I had promised my wife I would not smoke. I don't know if I promised. I said I wouldn't smoke. Way before we got married, I smoked cigarettes before I got married. So my wife said to me, it's either, when we got engaged, my wife said, well, it's either me or the cigarettes. So I said, okay, give me 10 minutes to think. So she said, no, I'm not kidding. If we're going to stand under the same chuppah, you're not going to smoke. So I said something like, well, I won't smoke under the chuppah. But at the end of the day, and then she got the last word. She got the last word because I had to stop smoking. I stopped smoking. So then when I was in Kollel, so one Friday I had a cigarette. And I liked the idea at the end of the week. I liked the idea of relaxing with a cigarette. So then the next week I had a cigarette. And I was like, hey, this is good. What, the end of the week? Like, I think it was 3 weeks. I think the third week I had a cigarette. I come walking into the house. And see, the mistake I made was I walked in when she was in the room. And women have this incredible sense of smell. I think I got the front of my right shoe into the house. And she said, were you smoking? You know. So I said, well, yeah, Fridays I like to have a cigarette. Right? You lied to me. I said, how did I lie? She said, because you smoked and you didn't tell me. I see. Not telling. Binyamin, is that true or not true? Not, there you go. Not telling in their language is lying, right? And then I had a promise, and by everything holy, by the life of every White Sox player, that I would not smoke. And then I went 9 years without smoking, all because I blew it. If I would have told her in advance, I would have asked permission. She would have let me. But it was the deception. It was the deception. That's the part that gets them. That's what our job is in life, is midvar sheker tercha. Okay, now take a look at the next pasuk. Pasuk chaf aleph. It's the sixth line on the page. Lo sita lecha ashera kol eitz. Do not plant an ashera. We'll explain this in a moment. Any type of tree. Eitzel mizbach Hashem lokecha, by near the altar, alongside the altar of Hashem your God, asher ta'asalach, which you make. Now, first of all, an ashera was a tree that was worshipped by the pagans. The pagans would plant certain trees, and they would worship these trees. The tree was an idol, and the Torah talks about ashera. We should not make trees for idol worship. Rav Hirsch explains what's the idea. Rav Hirsch explains what's the idea about what kind of the pagans. What's the idea behind an ashera? So Rav Hirsch says, if I understood him, I didn't understand fully what he says, but it's along the lines. And what's the juxtaposition? Don't plant the Asherah tree alongside your Mizbeach, alongside the altar. So obviously you're talking about two forms of worship, because the Mizbeach represents the Jewish form, the ultimate Jewish form of worship, and an Asherah represents the pagan form of worship, or one of their forms of worship. So Rav Hirsch says like this. You see, they believed, they had these guys. I never read the mythology. I just remember the cartoon Thor and his hammer. They used to have a series on TV, Thor with his hammer. Didn't the hammer have a short handle or something? Yeah. Thor's hammer had a short. He would throw his hammer and knock people. And it was, there was a cartoon. But then I found out later, this is all out of Greek mythology, and the Roman gods and the Greek gods, and often the gods were involved. Is something not accurate? Scandinavian, okay. It's something, one, who is it, Norse? Is it Norse? Okay, Norse, okay. But there's Greeks, the Norse, all these Zachen with the gods. And there's a god of this and a god of that. And each god has his own jurisdiction, right? And sometimes the gods themselves were involved in immorality, all sorts of interesting stuff. So they believed, the ancients believed, that the gods have an influence on the physical world. And they believed, again, this is what Rav Hirsch writes, that an Asherah was a tree that is somehow under their God's divine protection. Okay? Now, we believe that in our service of God, of course God is involved in the physical world, and God runs the physical world. What's our role? Our role is that we have to submit our moral behavior to the will of God. All of our morals, ethics, everything that we do has to be submitted to the will of God. So when the Torah says, don't plant the Asherah by the Mizbeach. Don't plant the Asherah by a Mizbeach. So first of all, that tree, which represents their way of worship, that's their form of worship, has no place by our form of worship, which is completely opposite, which is represented by an altar. Remember, gentlemen, an altar in every religion. In every religion, there's an altar. Or in most religions, there's an altar. I just had a friend of mine who's originally from India. So he's a Jewish kid, grew up in India. He said in India, there are shrines, idol worship shrines everywhere you go, a real hardcore idol worship all over the place. Besides the animals, the creatures that they worship, there's hardcore idol worship shrines, that sort of thing. That has no place by us. We have an altar as well. Our altar represents how we serve HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Now, we serve HaKadosh Baruch Hu through submission. Not because, well, get to the God so that the God does good for you in this world. He does. But our submission, first of all, I have to submit my will. What I want and what God wants me to do, what I want and what God wants are always in conflict. And a Jew understands that what I want is immaterial. It's immaterial. Sure, I want it. But God has other ideas for me. He may have other, and that's the first step of Judaism, I have to submit to the God. So there's no room for that tree, which represents their ideology. There's no room for that tree near the altar, number one. Number two, a person might decide, I want to make it prettier. I want to make it aesthetic. I want to make it nicer. And therefore plant a tree. Don't go planting trees. We have our way that we've been told to serve. It's like a guy who decides, I want to paint little hearts on my tefillin. Wouldn't that be nice? Put little red hearts or little green hearts on your tefillin. Right? Now make the tefillin nicer a little bit. Put a symbol on the tefillin. Put a cub sign on the tefillin. Something. Maybe a prayer could help them. No, don't touch it. It's black and it's meant to be black, and leave it black, and don't add on to it. Just leave it the way it is. Well, they say the great artist, the sign of the great artist is when to stop. Sometimes you're always touching something up. You ever touch it up till you mess it up. And just one little touch up. No, stop. Just stop. Learn when to stop. Judaism says this is how I want it done. Don't add on. Don't put trees there. Number one. Okay. Now, I'll tell you a statement that the Gemara makes, because you should be wondering, what questions should you be asking yourself? As soon as you read verse 21, there's a question you should ask yourself. As soon as you read verse 21, before you even do any analyzing of what the verse is talking about, there's something that should jump into your mind. You should get used to train yourselves to analyze Torah this way. As soon as you read the verse, I say, don't plant the tree by the altar. You should immediately ask yourself, you should have hey, that's strange. You should have a question.
Why specifically the tree?
Why specifically the tree? Because the trees were worshipped by the. But we're going to get there. You're on the right track.
Specifying two different things. It says an idolatrous tree first, and then just a tree in general.
That's a tree in general. Okay, again, you're right, but you're analyzing the pasuk. Before you even analyze the pasuk, you should ask yourself. As soon as you hear the pasuk, you should ask yourself a question. As soon as you hear the pasuk, you say, what are we doing talking about trees? What were we talking about just now? About judges and bribery and being honest. How did we get onto this subject? Listen to 5-year-olds listen to children. It's very interesting. I heard this from Rabbi Tatz once, and after he pointed out, it's really true. When a child is born, doesn't know how to talk. As they get older, they start saying words. And they start saying words. My oldest son's first word was pop. Pop, right? I was a precocious youngster, and I already knew what's good in life. I said pop, right? Daughter's first word is usually money. Right? That's okay. That's a foretelling of future events, right? That was just a joke, but but it's not funny when it happens later. I told you about the 16-year-old girl. She comes up, she says, "Daddy, can I have money?" I said, "Well, is that all you could ever do is ask me for money?" She says, "What? I shouldn't talk to you at all." so kids have they get a word. The kid learns a word, then they start putting together sentences. Okay, now at a certain point they start communicating. It's fascinating. Listen to 2 4-year-olds talk to each other. I have a bicycle. My daddy's in the office. Right, my mommy's coming next week. We had chocolate last night. Nothing has anything to do with what they have a conversation. They're really talking to themselves, and they just have somebody else that happens to be there. But what you said and what he responds to you has absolutely nothing to do with each other, right? Watch it. That's how 4-year-olds and 5-year-olds talk to it. Then as you get to an adulthood, you start communicating. When you're a teenager, you communicate. And then when you get a little older, you just start antagonizing each other, right? But at least you have what to say to each other. So here, it has nothing to do. What's it? Lo sita l'cha asheira. Well, there's no accident. So you know what the Talmud says? The Talmud says, somebody who appoints. The Talmud says, what's the juxtaposition over here? The Talmud says, somebody who appoints an unworthy judge is as if he has planted an Asherah tree by the altar. You know, Mr. Lewis, your first name again is? Ben. So like Ben said, well, why a tree? It's a very good question. Why a tree? If you've appointed, if I would have said it, if I wanted to be dramatic and talk about how bad it is to appoint, because the Torah here is not only talking to the judges, it's also talking to the appointers of the judges. And often the people who appoint the judges have an agenda. Sure, I'm appointing the judges. If you're a guy who donates to the candidate's campaign, I always wondered, why are these business? Why do the candidates get so much money in their campaign trail? Sure, because when a corporation donates to a candidate, and that corporation happens to be a gambling corporation, and this candidate gets elected and suddenly legalizes or zones gambling in his area, then you understand, hey, there might be cause and effect over here. So a guy who appoints a judge may appoint a corrupt judge because, I know that I've got shtick going on over here, and then one day I may end up in court. And therefore the Torah realizes, not just a warning to the judges, the appointers are also accountable, in some cases more accountable. So the Talmud says, now if I was saying it, I would say, if you appoint a corrupt judge, it's as if you put an idol by the altar. Why does the Torah say in terms of an Asherah tree by the altar? And the Gemara says that's the connection. Why? What's the common denominator? Go.
It's not obvious.
Very good, very good, very good. In other words, exact spot on. Every idol in the world, you take a look at him, you see it's an idol. There's a little guy. The little guy can't afford the shirt. Like the fat little guy who can't afford a shirt, Buddha. Right? You say, he's got, he's got his belly sticking out. They had poor guy, help him out. So that looks like an idol. That certainly looks like an idol. What about a tree? A tree looks like a tree. And the only thing that makes it an idol is the fact that somebody has worshipped it. From the outside, you can't tell that it's an idol. So the commentaries say exactly what you're saying. The commentaries say, again, your first name is? Yigal. Exactly what Yigal says. When you appoint a judge, nobody may the guy's got a long beard, payas, he eats pickled herring, listen, the guy's got all the qualifications of a Jew. And what more could you possibly want, And the guy even has a guy who wears a gartel. Hey, this guy looks from. Right? Oh, yeah, he's righteous. But we all know, and nobody else knows. And therefore, if you appoint a false judge, if you appoint a corrupt judge, it's as if, that's why specifically it mentions an Asherah tree. Okay, number 2. 2 more points on this pasuk. What's the common denominator between a judge and an altar? Right? There's, again, the Mizbeach somehow ends up in close proximity to the judge over here. What's the common denominator between the Mizbeach, between the altar, and a Torah judge? And we're not talking about a corrupt Torah judge, we're talking about a proper Torah judge. So there's a common denominator. And most Torah judges are not corrupt. It's just that the Torah warns constantly, don't be corrupt. Okay? What's the common denominator? Okay, so this is a little tougher. Do you remember how the Mizbeach was made in the Beis Hamikdash? What was the Mizbeach made out of? Mizbeach HaNechoshes. What was it made out of? Made out of copper. Made out of copper. What was the inside? No? Close? Close? Dirt. Dirt. It was stuffed with dirt. No, there's a golden one. The golden one is the internal altar. The external altar where they offered the sacrifices. There were two altars in the Beis Hamikdash. There was the Mizbeach HaNechoshes, which was the external one where they offered all the sacrifices, and there was the one where they burned the incense. That was the golden one. That was the internal one. Now, the internal one was pure gold. But the one outside of the Azara in the courtyard was made out of copper, but it was hollow. It was copper and it had a hollow inside. What was the inside stuff? The inside was filled with dirt. Filled with mud, dirt, whatever you want to call it. It was filled with dirt. So the Torah is telling you, what a Torah judge has to be? I mean, a judge, you got to be careful. I just got ticketed this morning. I didn't get ticketed. I got stopped for a ticket. My son was driving me. We put 3 guys into the car. We took 3 guys. They were on our way to Mir. So we just turned the corner. We'd driven about 20 yards, and a cop stopped us, looked through the window, and he saw a guy in the back didn't have a seatbelt on, so he gave the guy a ticket for 250 shekels. And the guy, I didn't say anything. I didn't say what I was saying to Hillam at the time. I was saying to Hillam, and I just said to Hillam even more intensely. And the guy said something. He said something to the cop like, well, let me have your name also. So what did the cop do? The cop did nothing. The cop do. He's by law. He has to give his name and his, has to show his identity. But you're in his hands, and the cop was clearly he stretched it out a while. Okay, let him sweat a little bit. Let him wait. And he took his sweet old time about it. And you're in his hands. Now, what happens? A police in general. What's the danger of anybody who's got law enforcement in his hand? What's the danger? The danger is that the power could go to your head a little bit. They now have a law in the United States, if I'm not mistaken. I think they're passing a law now that most or all police have to be wearing a camera. The police have to be wearing a camera because, like, if you need law enforcement, but there's always a danger that when you're in a position of power, the power could go to your head. Now, what's the danger by a judge? You're holding a lot of power in your hand. You're making decisions in court, besides the fact that you're vulnerable to money. So the Torah says the qualification of a judge is you have to parallel the altar. What does that mean? It means on the outside you have to be copper. What's in the choshes? Copper. You have to be tough, hard as metal on the outside. It means you got a rule. There's a law in the Torah we saw earlier on. You're not allowed to be intimidated as a judge. You're not allowed to be afraid of anybody. Do you know that? You're not allowed to be afraid of anybody. If there's a guy in Beis Din who's a tough character, you're not allowed to back out. You have the lo saguru mipnei ish. You're not allowed to be intimidated as a judge, and you have to. That's too bad. You're going to have to. You have to be tough, and you have to be willing to rule against people, even if it's an unpopular ruling. Not that easy in life. Sometimes you got to rule against the guy. I remember the rabbi who married us, my wife's rabbi. He told me when he took over the synagogue, and as a rabbi, you're going to make unpopular decisions. One of the wealthy men in the shul was a Levi, a very wealthy man, very influential man in the shul, very wealthy man in the shul. This rabbi was a young rabbi who had just come in. He was there for a couple of years, and this wealthy man's son had a bar mitzvah. The problem was that the son was adopted, and as an adopted son, he does not get the second aliyah; he gets the third aliyah. And the rabbi said to him, well, as he's going to have, and the father wanted him to get a Levi aliyah. Well, the father was not observant, but he wanted him to have he wanted to have a Levi. And the rabbi said he's not going to get the Levi aliyah because he can't have the Levi aliyah. He gets the third aliyah. And the man yelled and ranted and threatened everything else. As a rabbi, as a communal leader, you're not allowed to be intimidated. You have to do what the halacha says. You have to be diplomatic, and you have to try to soften people, and you have to do everything. But at the end of the day, there's a line that you're not allowed to cross. There's a line that you're not allowed to cross. Every rabbi in America, they always said when you took it, certainly in the 50s and 60s, when you took a position as a rabbi, you had to be willing to walk out of the shul and give up your job. Because there's always the conflict between the rabbi and the board of directors. And the decisions in the shul were always that the rabbi is in charge of the halakhic aspect, and the board of directors is in charge of the ritual aspect. Right? And the problem is that those lines sometimes get very, very blurry. That's where the conflict. A judge is not allowed to be intimidated. Therefore, the Torah says, on the one hand, you got to be copper on the outside. But on the inside, how should you see yourself? See yourself as dirt. Don't let it go to your head. You stay humble. Humility and a firmness, humility and strength are not a contradiction in terms. Moshe Rabbeinu was very strong, but he was also humble. You have to be very firm, very decisive, but don't let it go to your head. That's why he's compared to Mizbech. Okay. Now, there's one more thought here, very interesting. People will often ask, they'll pick on a detail of Judaism. They'll say, well, what sense does that make? What sense does that make? What sense does A make, B make, C? But what sense does it make? I'll give you a concrete example in a moment. And then the mistake that you make is you try to answer them. When you try to answer them, then they'll spin you into a web of self-contradictions. Because if you start in the middle of the game, what sense does it make that a knight could jump over pieces? What do you mean, what sense? So, because the knight has to get from here to there. Yeah, but the rook can't jump, and the queen can't jump, the king can't jump, so what sense does it make? Okay, hold on, let's go back to the basics. There's a game called chess, right? Yes. And chess was designed by a certain person, right? Yes. I don't know who it was. I think they say chess came from the Egyptians or something. You had thousands of years. Where did? Form of it, and in the Egyptians or something, whatever it is, whoever it was, it doesn't interest. Whatever it was, 2,000 years ago or 1,000 years ago, somebody designed the name of chess. Somebody named Chess designed the game of chess. When he designed it, he made up any rules he wanted. So once he made up the rules, you don't have to. In the middle of the game, you're going to ask me, do the rules make sense? Yeah, but ask the guy who made the game. Okay, now what happens in Torah is you often get a situation like this. One of the common criticisms in this country is, look at the religious Jews. They have separate buses. The men sit in the front, the women go to the back. They're second-class citizens, they go to the back of the bus, and there they are, they're degrading the women again. Okay, now, which is a common, why are you sending the women to the back of the bus? Okay, and the answer to the question is, well, one second, you're asking me about a detail. You're asking about a specific detail in one area. First, tell me what the goal is, And once you've defined what the goal is, then I can tell you why any one detail, where that fits in trying to achieve the goal. So, for one thing, in Judaism, obviously, there's something called gender separation. And one of the reasons why there's gender separation, because one of this, what I'll call a sub-goal, is to avoid immorality. Immorality is an avera. We want to do everything we can to avoid immorality. So, we have found with our experience that the more the genders are separated, the more there's going to be less immorality. And when you have, for the good of democracy and the good of people's rights and the good of freedom of speech and the good of freedom of expression and the good of freedom of everything else, at the end of the day you get more immorality. And therefore, a person has to say, well, 1 second, what's the ultimate goal? Democracy or to avoid immorality? Well, in our value system, avoiding immorality is a very, very high priority. What are we willing to do for that? We're willing to create separate schools. We're willing to have a mechitza. We're willing to have separate buses. We're willing to have the women sit on the other side of the table and not talk to the men, and so on and so forth. But it's all part of a system because there's a goal. So if you ignore the goal and only isolate, yes, well, that looks like the American South, right? Putting the women to the back of the bus. It looks like the American South in the 50s. Well, if you want to use cliches and you want to use cutie slogans, yeah, you're absolutely right. But what was the goal over here? And we have a greater goal. So the Chassam Sofer, one of the great commentators, says, on Motzei Shabbos, some people have there's two Tehillim that we say right before Ma'ariv, on Motzei Shabbos. And one of the lines in Tehillim is, Banenu, I have written down over here, 1 second, Asher Banenu Kinnitiyim, our sons are like saplings. They've been planted. Asher Banenu Kinnitiyim Megudalim Benunurehem, they will grow, they grow or they will grow. Binosenu Kizavios Mechutavos Tavdis Heichal. Our daughters represent the sanctuary. What was in the sanctuary? Ultimately, the greatest, the form of service, again, is the altar in the sanctuary, Mechutavos Heichal. So the Chassam Sofer says over here, on this Pasuk 21, you know what the Torah is alluding to? Again, that's certainly not the plain meaning. Chassam Sofer says the Torah is alluding, Lo sita lecha asherah kol eitz. There's your tree. Don't plant any tree, alludes to the young men. Eitzel mizbach Hashem alokecha, by the altar of Hashem your God, an allusion to the young ladies. No mixing, no gender mixing. So no socializing, no social groups, that sort of thing. Now, a person again from the outside looks and says, that's really weird. Okay, if that's how you define weird, then I'll agree with you. That's really weird. On the other hand, there are very few teen abortions in Bnei Brak and in Kiryat Sefer and in Mea Shearim. You know, you understand, because what we have a goal over here. We have a goal. We're not. It's not just random. Okay, let's oppress the women today. What are we going to do? Put a tichel on their head and make them go to the back of the bus. You know, number one. Number two, ask the women if they feel oppressed. Everybody says, well, the women are being oppressed. Why don't you ask the women if they feel oppressed? Right? From women, I don't know if you've seen, from women you've met, but from women I met don't feel oppressed. And if they do feel oppressed, why don't we ask the men if they feel oppressed? Why don't you ask me how I feel about having the responsibility to support my family? Why don't you ask me, how do I feel? I thought you'd never ask. I feel oppressed, as a matter of fact. I feel that, and it's a burden I've been saddled with. Listen, life is like that. So people say, well, yeah, but the women, they're only saying it because they're influenced by their society. The society indoctrinates with them. And the Western society hasn't indoctrinated women with all sorts of values. The Western society hasn't indoctrinated women that you're supposed to go to college and go to frat parties and drink punch and then have an abortion. That hasn't been an indoctrination. It's all a result of indoctrination. Yeah, so we indoctrinate a certain way, and then look at the women. I mean, if the goal of life is also to be happy, most people in life would rather be. 9 out of 10 people surveyed would rather be happy than miserable. So if you ask people, well, you want to be? Do you really see for women are so oppressed? That's our approach, and our approach is that there's a greater good over here. And I want to tell you something. If you ask your average secular person in a moment of truth, get him alone in a room, and ask a secular man in his 40s or 50s. Would you like your daughter, who's in college, to behave the way girls behaved with you when you were in college? Ask any man. Get him in a moment of truth. There isn't a father in the world who would agree to that. And the father would, yes, I'm proud of my daughter. What's that? They might choke you. Right? They might choke you, but they certainly will. So no father says, yes, I want my daughter drunk at frat parties. I want her to dive into the punch like there's no tomorrow, right? Because she doesn't want to think tomorrow about what she did today, right? Yeah, nobody in the world would agree to that. And therefore the Torah says, well, that's a greater good. That's what the Chasam Sofer is alluding to. What I'm trying to tell you is, there's a famous story about the kid who walks into the cockpit of a plane. Those cockpits are interesting. I still would like to get in there. Kid walks into the cockpit of a plane, he looks around, sees a big green button. He says, what does that button do? And which everybody asks. I would ask it too. And the correct response is, oh, you mean you got everything else worked out? That's the only button you don't know. Everything else you understand, all the other gadgets and buttons, you understand that button. Okay, so that's the one that attracts our attention. But it's a ridiculous question. It's an absolutely ridiculous question. I was once in a hospital, and I saw them actually put a mask on somebody's face. Do you believe that? Put a mask on somebody's face in a hospital? In a surgical theater. They put a mask on somebody's face. What sense does that make? The answer is it happened to be a gas mask, and it was for anesthesia, and they had to put the person to sleep because they had to do surgery. Right? The person was me. Right? Otherwise, I wouldn't be in the hospital watching these things. You understand? What sense does it make to take a knife and cut a little 8-year-old baby? And everybody yells Mazel Tov while the baby screams. Tell me that makes sense. Hey, Mazel Tov! And then in the irony of irony, they do a bris milah, and right after the guy who cut the baby then makes a mishaberach, please Hashem, cure this baby. Well, leave the knife alone. Leave the knife alone, and then we won't have to say mishaberach to cure the baby. The answer is that there may be a greater good over here. There may be a bigger goal. There may be a bigger goal. That's why, by the way, bris milah is very traumatic for a mother. A mother, I mean, picture yourself, you got a mother, you got this little ooey gooey baby. The mother's 8 days after birth. She's in pain. Her entire hormonal system is completely out of whack. She's emotional. She cries for good. She cries for, she's completely emotional. And she's got a little ooey gooey baby who's 8 years old. And the next thing you know, he's being whisked off by a bunch of men with beards, and one of them's got a knife. Now, how would you think if you were the mother? right? And off goes the baby. So none of it makes any sense. The answer is, well, it depends what the greater goal is. That's the idea. Okay, we'll continue tomorrow, gentlemen.